I will share our thinking about next year is that it will be more like this year than this year was like last year. And I say that as an institution that relies heavily on a partnership with Maguire Associates for the econometric modeling, and there's always some variation from what you project and predict. But of course, the modeling is only as good as future behavior mimics past behavior, and I do believe next year will be more like this year in terms of outcomes. And I do think it'll be a tough year in the sense that many of the students who we courted through this last year's recruitment process were so far along in their decision making. They'd made the visits. They had set their sights on a particular constellation of institutions. I think they decided to proceed as planned. That is not the case with the juniors, and maybe less of a case with the sophomores. And I actually, neurotic, obsessive compulsive personality that I have, went back through the last 40 years of WPI's history in terms of its enrollment patterns and tracked that with recessions, and found that it wasn't the first year of a recession where there was a downturn, and it wasn't the second year. It was consistently the third year. And so if you're waiting for the other shoe to drop, my prediction is that that's yet to come. And it was always in the third year from the inception of a recession.
I'm sort of worried that it may be worse than that third year echo. That this was such a traumatic experience with so much that was unprecedented that it's going to scar people for a generation the way the Depression did. You know, a lot of us grew up with parents who would continually remind you of why you needed to get off the phone quickly and turn out the lights and so on. And I'm not sure how this is going to affect the psychologies of family and even high net worth individuals who are now very, very concerned about whether they'll be able to sustain their positions and what will be around the next curve.
We have a panel now of newly minted high school seniors who were, at the time we did the first research, juniors, and they seemed more uncertain and pessimistic than their senior colleagues, but a lot of that might have been predictable because they were further back and less sure of the process. But as I've looked more carefully at some data over the last couple of days from the most recent look we've taken into the fast web panel of hundreds of thousands of people, it's become clear, responding to what Dan just said, that the high net worth families who still have their jobs are concerned, but the major concern, statistically significantly more major concern, are in the lower income families. Most of the families in this country have incomes under $80,000. The very selective institutions that sit here and many represented out there serve disproportionately families with incomes above $80,000 and in some cases even above $200,000 and in some cases even above $1 million. It's very clear that and I won't get into this in detail, but the income shifts, and we've seen them reported recently in the press, that have taken place over the last 30 years, starting with President Reagan's cut in the upper bracket tax cut from 50 to 35. That's a 30% decrease, 15 points. That's caused a panic among people who are watching Obama respond by proposing that the tax bracket go from 35 to 39.6, about 5 points. That's 10%. And how that's going to impact the people at the top. Well, in fact, what's really happened, and I'll end with this, but I think it has a big impact on educating the vast majority of people who have entered the system since 1950, that is the low and moderate income families who are making for the big growth in higher education enrollment. The income, not the tax transfer, but the income transfer that's taken place over that period of time, separate from taxation reduction, has been between $1.5 trillion and $2 trillion. And that money, which went to the bottom 90%, of the income pool in this country, the annual income pool, just income, has leapfrogged over the next 9 points to the top 1%. So that in 1950, the top 1% had 10% of the overall income in this country. They now have 25. That means their, in today's dollars, their income has gone up 150%, and they're worried about a return in taxes that might involve 10%, 5 percentage points. Most of the families that are being impacted by what's going on today are in the below 100,000, even below 60,000 bracket, and I think we got to worry more about them even than we do about the folks that we disproportionately educate, and I think that's where the crisis is going to be, of families that may 2 or 3 years from now decide they just can't do it.
It has long been the case at WPI that students have come to us because they view WPI as a way to secure good jobs at good wages. That's been the mantra of every alumni population leaving the institution for several generations. And I think in recessionary times, even when things turn around, that may well seep into the general consciousness and be the case that we need to do a really good job of communicating the return on investment for families, that will be first and foremost in the minds of the families, even if they have the capacity to write out the check.